Welcome to today's deep dive. I want you to picture a scenario that I think most of us have experienced at some point.
Oh, definitely.
You are sitting in the window seat of a cross-country flight. You've hit cruising altitude, you open the window shade, and you just look down at the landscape rolling by underneath you.
Right, the classic window seat view.
Yeah. And what do you see? You see these massive, perfectly geometric grids of green and gold.
Just endless squares.
Exactly. You see these sprawling fields that seem to stretch for absolute miles, maybe interrupted by an occasional cluster of barns or a winding river.
Yeah.
And maybe, as you watch this massive quilt of agriculture pass by, you wonder why are certain types of farms located exactly where they are.
It's a great question.
Right. Like, why is it that you don't look out your window as you approach the city limits of a major metropolis like Chicago or London and see a sprawling 10,000-acre cattle ranch right next to the airport?
That would be quite a sight.
It really would.
Yeah.
Or, why certain crops absolutely dominate specific regions of the world, while in other places, a farmer's plot looks completely different.
And it's one of those everyday observations that feels entirely random until you learn to read the underlying code of the landscape.
The code. I like that.
Yeah, because most of us just operate under the assumption that it all comes down to the quality of the dirt and the local weather patterns.
Sure, sun and rain.
Right. We assume you grow wheat where the soil likes wheat, and you raise cows where the grass is good. And while those environmental factors obviously form the biological foundation,
Obvious.
they are completely insufficient for explaining the modern agricultural map. So the goal for this deep dive is to look way beyond just the climate and the soil.
We're going a lot deeper.
Exactly. We are going to decode the hidden economic math, really the spatial logic, that secretly dictates the organization of our entire global food system.
To do that, we are pulling from a really fascinating source document today.
It really is.
It's an extensive outline detailing AP Human Geography topic 5.6. And for those familiar with the field, this topic is entirely focused on the economic logic of global agricultural regions.
The hidden architecture of it all.
Right. It maps out how money, distance, and the absolute necessity of survival all combine to paint the agricultural landscape of the entire planet.
It's essentially the math that tells a farmer not just what they can grow, but what they are economically forced to grow based on exactly where they are standing.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, we have to start with the most fundamental division in all of agriculture.
The big split.
The big split, yes. Before we talk about soil types or rainfall, we have to look at the end goal of the person putting the seed in the dirt.
The actual motivation.
Exactly. Why are they farming in the first place? Is the goal sheer survival, or is the goal corporate profit?
Right.
That basic motivation gives us our two main categories: subsistence agriculture and commercial agriculture.
Let's start with subsistence.
Subsistence agriculture is exactly what it sounds like. The primary goal is survival. The farmer is working the land to feed themselves, their immediate family, and perhaps a small local community.
So they aren't checking the stock market.
Not at all. They're not looking at global commodity prices. They're looking at their own dinner table.
Because the goal is survival, their entire planting strategy has to reflect that reality.
It absolutely has to.
Right, because if you and your family are entirely dependent on your own specific plot of land to stay alive through the winter, you simply cannot afford to plant an entire farm of nothing but radishes.
You'd be in serious trouble.
You would suffer from severe malnutrition. You need a deeply well-rounded diet to survive.
Right.
So subsistence farming inherently involves growing a really wide variety of crops.
Yeah, a true mix.
You might have a plot of grains, some root vegetables, a variety of greens, and you are usually raising a mix of different animals too, like chickens for eggs and goats for milk.
You are essentially forced to create a self-sustaining microecosystem that covers all of your nutritional bases.
Geographically speaking, where are we seeing this the most?
Well, our source notes that this type of agriculture is predominantly practiced in peripheral or developing countries.
Okay.
You see a vast amount of subsistence farming in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. But it is crucial to understand why this happens here.
It's not just a lack of tractors, right?
Exactly. It isn't just a lack of funds to buy a tractor. It is about the surrounding economic ecosystem.
The infrastructure.
Yes. If a farmer in a rural peripheral region manages to grow a massive surplus crop of incredibly high-quality, delicate berries.
Just a huge bumper crop.
Right. That surplus is utterly useless to them without the heavy economic infrastructure to support it.
Because they can't move it.
They can't. If there are no paved highway systems, no refrigerated trucks, and no cold chain storage facilities at a nearby port,
Those berries are just going to sit there.
they will simply rot in the sun before they ever reach a paying customer.
Wow.
Therefore, the most logical, rational choice for that farmer is to focus on subsistence. The lack of infrastructure dictates the survival strategy.
That is a stark contrast to the other side of the agricultural coin, commercial agriculture.
Night and day.
If subsistence is about immediate survival and creating a micro-ecosystem, commercial agriculture is entirely about maximizing profit and integrating into a macroeconomy.
A global scale.
Yes, the primary goal is to grow specific products to sell them on the mass market. The farmers running these operations likely aren't eating what they grow.
Or if they are, it represents a microscopic fraction of their total yield.
Right. A commercial wheat farmer buys their bread at the grocery store just like you do.
Because the goal is profit and mass market sales. The physical methods and the geography look entirely different.
They need a lot more space.
Commercial agriculture relies heavily on massive scale. It is deeply dependent on modern technology.
Like those giant tractors.
Exactly. $500,000 heavy machinery, synthetic chemical fertilizers, and complex computer-controlled irrigation systems.
So you need a very specific environment for that.
You need a highly specific, robust environment for this business model to thrive, which is why commercial agriculture is overwhelmingly found in core or developed countries.
That makes perfect sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see how macroeconomic infrastructure fundamentally shapes the micro decisions of what is actually planted in the ground across the globe.
Because the core countries have the highways.
They have the massive highway systems, the processing plants, the grain elevators, and the seamless global trade networks required to support mass market sales.
So a farmer in the U.S. can just load up a train.
A commercial farmer in the United States or Western Europe can harvest 10,000 acres of corn and have it on a freight train heading to an international port by the next morning.
That's incredible.
The infrastructure is what makes the pursuit of massive profit viable, which in turn justifies the enormous capital investment in the farming operation itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when we zoom in on that commercial side of things, where maximizing profit is the sole driving force, farmers often turn to extreme specialization to increase their efficiency.
Yes, specialization is key.
But our notes point out a highly specific distinction regarding this specialization that people constantly mix up.
They definitely do.
If you watch agricultural documentaries or read articles about the global food supply, you will hear two terms thrown around interchangeably: monocropping and monoculture.
They sound identical to a layperson.
They really do, but they represent wildly different realities for the soil and the long-term viability of the farm.
It is a critical distinction that highlights the incredible nuance in modern agricultural planning. Let's break down monocropping first.
Let's do it.
Monocropping is the practice of cultivating the exact same crop on the exact same plot of land year after year indefinitely.
Indefinitely.
There is absolutely no variation. You plant corn this spring, you harvest it in the fall, next spring. You plant corn again on that exact same dirt.
And the year after that.
Corn again.
But wait, anyone with even a passing knowledge of gardening knows that planting something like corn over and over again completely drains the soil of essential nutrients.
Specifically nitrogen.
Right. It leaves the land barren and invites specialized pests to set up a permanent camp.
It does.
That seems like a terrible long-term business model. If commercial farming is entirely about maximizing profit, why would a rational farmer willingly choose a strategy that degrades their most valuable asset to their land?
That's a great question.
Wouldn't that hurt their bottom line eventually?
Well, it's a fascinating paradox of commercial farming. The answer comes down to the sheer cost of the machinery and the pursuit of short-term specialized efficiency.
So it's about the equipment.
Exactly. In a highly commercialized setup, a farmer might invest millions of dollars into highly specialized equipment planters, sprayers, and combine harvesters that are specifically calibrated for corn.
Oh, wow.
They have locked themselves into a massive sunk cost. To justify that debt, they need to maximize the use of that specific equipment every single year.
So they can't just switch to a crop that requires different machines.
Right. They essentially trade long-term soil health for short-term operational efficiency, heavily relying on synthetic chemical fertilizers to artificially pump those lost nutrients back into the dead soil.
Which brings us to the alternative monoculture.
Yes.
In a monoculture system, a farmer is still growing only one kind of crop in a given field at a given time.
Right. Visually, it looks similar.
Yeah, if you drive past the farm, you still only see a massive ocean of a single plant species. However, the crucial difference lies in the strategy of rotation.
Rotation is everything.
A farmer utilizing monoculture might plant 1,000 acres of corn this year, but next year they will plant that exact same field entirely with soybeans.
And the year after that, maybe wheat.
They are rotating the single crop. They still get the efficiency of harvesting one uniform crop at a time, but by rotating a nitrogen-draining crop like corn with a nitrogen-fixing crop like soybeans.
They are actively managing the long-term health of the soil.
Exactly, and disrupting the life cycles of pests. It requires a broader range of equipment and knowledge, but it is vastly more sustainable than strictly monocropping.
To cement this for you, the source provides some incredibly memorable geographic examples of where these massive, specialized commercial operations dominate the global map.
Right. When you picture sprawling oceans of wheat and corn that stretch to the horizon, you are looking straight at the United States Midwest.
The breadbasket.
The infrastructure there is entirely built around moving grain. Now, if you are talking about massive industrial-scale sugarcane operations, Brazil is the prime example.
They dominate that market.
They have dedicated massive swaths of their geography and economy to perfecting the cultivation and processing of sugar.
Now, what about tea?
For highly specialized tea production, you are looking at the intricate, sprawling operations built into the landscapes of India and Sri Lanka. Entire regional economies are built around mastering these specialized commercial practices.
So if Brazil is dominated by these massive commercial sugar operations and the U.S. Midwest is an ocean of wheat, it begs a logistical question.
How do they manage it all?
Exactly. Are they farming a 10,000-acre wheat field the same way a subsistence farmer manages a half-acre vegetable plot?
Definitely not.
This introduces the concepts of intensive versus extensive farming. It is a look at the ratio between the size of the land and the amount of money and human sweat poured into it.
Let's tackle intensive farming first.
Okay.
The word intensive really is the perfect descriptor. Intensive farming involves taking a relatively small area of land and hitting it with incredibly high levels of labor and capital.
And capital in this context means serious financial investment.
Right. Money spent on advanced chemical fertilizers, complex irrigation systems, climate-controlled greenhouses, and highly specialized machinery.
The entire goal is to squeeze out the absolute highest possible biological yield per hectare of land.
You are fighting to maximize the value of every single square inch of dirt.
It is a high-pressure system born out of spatial limitation. You don't have a lot of space, so you have to make the space you do have work incredibly hard.
What's a good example of that?
The examples of intensive farming are fascinating because they vary wildly depending on whether the heavy input is human labor or financial capital. Think of traditional rice paddies in Southeast Asia.
Oh, the terraced hillsides?
Yes. These are often relatively small, meticulously terraced plots of land. They require a staggering...
Exactly. Because the land is so limited and costly, farmers use highly intensive, capital-heavy methods to grow high-value, luxury crops that can actually justify the cost of owning that land.
You also see this intensity with market gardening,
which is essentially large-scale vegetable farming located very near urban centers where land prices are notoriously high.
Dairy farming is another perfect example of intensive agriculture.
Really? Dairy?
Oh, absolutely. A commercial dairy farm operates on a relatively small physical footprint compared to a massive crop farm. However, the capital input is enormous.
Because of the facilities.
You have millions invested in automated milking machinery, specialized feed, veterinary care, and climate-controlled barns.
And the milk itself.
Right. You are producing a constant daily output of a highly perishable product that requires immediate refrigerated transport.
Which perfectly sets up the contrast with extensive farming.
The complete opposite approach.
If intensive farming is about squeezing maximum value out of a tiny, expensive plot, extensive farming is about utilizing massive, sweeping areas of land.
Huge tracts of land.
Because the total land area is so vast, the relative inputs of labor and capital per individual acre are actually quite low.
You aren't micromanaging every square foot.
Consequently, the overall crop yield per hectare is significantly lower than in intensive farming. But the sheer volume of land makes up for the lower per acre yield.
You are relying on scale rather than intensity.
All right.
The quintessential examples here are the sprawling wheat farms in the U.S. Great Plains, or large-scale cattle ranching.
Oh, the ranges.
Whether you are looking at the vast grassy pampas of Argentina or the sweeping arid landscapes of the American West, cattle ranching requires immense amounts of physical space for the animals to graze and survive.
You just can't herd cattle in a greenhouse.
You simply cannot intensely manage millions of acres of wild grassland the way you manage a small flooded rice paddy. The math doesn't work.
Even with specific crops, extensive farming applies beautifully. Think about large-scale potato farming.
Potatoes are a great example.
Potatoes are incredibly hardy root vegetables. They aren't as delicate as a greenhouse strawberry or a vine-ripened tomato.
Heaven take a beating.
They can be farmed extensively over huge tracts of land with significantly less micromanagement and lower fertilizer inputs per acre. You plant them over a massive area, let them grow, and harvest them with large machinery.
What's fascinating here is how all of these seemingly disparate pieces we've discussed, the survival versus profit motive, the monoculture versus monocropping decisions, the intensive versus extensive methods, are all ultimately governed by a single overarching economic rule.
The big reveal.
This is the ultimate spatial logic that acts as the punchline to this entire deep dive. It's called the bid-rent theory.
The bid-rent theory. This is the grand unifying theory of the agricultural map.
It really is.
This is the secret math that explains exactly why the view out of your airplane window looks the way it does.
To grasp the mechanics of this theory, we have to set the geographical stage.
Let's visualize it.
The easiest way to visualize this is to imagine a city as a giant dartboard. Right in the absolute center, the bullseye of the dartboard, you have the CBD.
The Central Business District.
Exactly. You can picture the dense, towering financial district of London, or the pulsing commercial heart of Chicago.
The CBD is the center of gravity for the entire region.
It is the hub of buying, selling, and dense commercial activity.
And everyone wants to be there.
Right. Because every business wants to be located in the center where the money, the consumers, and the transport hubs converge. The demand for physical space is astronomically high.
So it's super expensive.
The bid-rent theory dictates a very simple, unbreakable economic rule. The demand and the price for land strictly decrease the further away you get from that central business district.
Okay, so the closer to the bullseye, the higher the rent.
The closer you are to the city center, the higher the rent you have to bid. The further out you drive into the rural periphery, the cheaper the dirt becomes.
That single, simple fact, the sliding scale of land cost, is what dictates the modern commercial farmer's entire strategy.
It forces their hand.
Let's look at the first scenario, high land cost. This is agricultural land that is located relatively near the CBD, perhaps just outside the immediate suburban ring.
Very close to the city.
Because this land is in high demand, it is incredibly expensive to purchase or rent. The farmer is essentially competing with suburban real estate developers for the dirt.
And developers have deep pockets.
Exactly. Because the land is so expensive, a farmer simply cannot afford to buy 10,000 acres of it.
They're forced by the economics of the real estate market to operate on a small plot. And because they have a small plot of very expensive land, they have absolutely no choice but to engage in intensive farming.
They have to make it count.
They must utilize heavy capital and labor to squeeze massive high-margin value out of every single inch just to break even on their mortgage or rent.
That makes sense.
But the bid-rent theory goes a step further than just dictating the volume of production. It dictates the exact biological nature of what they grow.
I always think of this in terms of sheer absurdity. If I have $50 million, I can't buy 1 acre of land in downtown Manhattan, put a single cow on it, and call it a ranch.
No, you definitely cannot.
I would be bankrupt in a week because the agricultural output of 1 cow will never cover the real estate cost of Manhattan. I have to grow something that yields massive cash value quickly.
Furthermore, because you are physically close to the city, you are close to a massive market of millions of consumers.
The hungry masses.
This is exactly why you consistently find highly perishable items being farmed in these inner, expensive agricultural rings.
Because they go bad quickly.
Yes. We are talking about dairy farms producing milk, or market gardens growing fresh, delicate vegetables like lettuce, spinach, and soft berries.
You can't just leave those sitting around.
These specific biological products have a very short shelf life. They have to get from the soil to the grocery store shelf incredibly fast.
If a commercial dairy farm was located 1,000 miles away from the city in a cheap rural area, the logistics would destroy the business.
It would be impossible.
By the time the milk slowly made its way via truck or train to the CBD, it would be completely ruined.
The farmer would end up with a transport vehicle full of spoiled produce, and they'd go bankrupt.
So, highly perishable, intensive goods must be grown on the expensive land close to the city out of sheer biological necessity and transport time limits.
It is a flawless, ruthless marriage of real estate economics and plant biology.
It really is.
Now, let's balance that equation by looking at the outer rings of our dartboard, the scenario of lowland cost.
The outer edges.
When you travel far away from the CBD, out past the suburbs, out into the deep rural periphery, land is cheap and highly abundant.
There's plenty of space.
There is virtually no competition from commercial real estate developers out there.
Which totally flips the farmer's strategy upside down.
Completely.
Because the dirt is cheap, they can afford to buy massive, sweeping amounts of acreage. And because they have so much land, they naturally transition into extensive farming.
They don't need the greenhouses.
Right. They don't need to spend millions on climate-controlled greenhouses to squeeze value out of every square inch because they have millions of square inches to work with.
This distant, massive, cheap ring is exactly where you find your large-scale cattle ranches or your endless oceans of grain and wheat.
And crucially, think about the perishability factor of these specific products compared to the berries and the milk.
It's night and day.
Wheat doesn't spoil in a few days.
No, it can sit dry in a grain silo for months.
A cow can literally be transported alive on a train, or the processed meat can be frozen and shipped over massive distances without degrading.
Potatoes can sit in the dark hold of a truck for weeks,
These products are significantly less perishable.
which means they can easily survive the long, slow, cheap transport times from those distant rural rings back to the lucrative center of the CBD.
The bid-rent theory elegantly proves that the map of global agriculture is not arbitrary.
Not at all.
You don't put a sprawling cattle ranch next to downtown Chicago because the real estate cost would bankrupt the rancher before the first calf was born.
And you don't put a delicate, intensive strawberry farm 1,000 miles away from the city center because the transport time would reduce the product to mush.
The physical distance from the market strictly dictates the price of the land.
The price of the land dictates the intensity of the farming method.
And the perishability of the crop dictates how far away it can physically survive being grown.
It's a perfect system.
So what does this all mean? It means the global agricultural landscape is highly predictable.
It's a beautifully complex reflection of absolute economic necessity.
Every single day, whether they are in the U.S. Midwest or the coast of the Mediterranean, farmers are constantly playing this high-stakes, real-world game of balancing the cost of their real estate against the biological requirements of their crops and the physical distance to their buyers.
It perfectly explains why core developed countries dominate the commercial landscape with their advanced infrastructure, while peripheral regions remain the stronghold for essential subsistence farming.
It is all deeply connected by the exact same underlying spatial logic.
Yes, it is.
I want you to really think about this the next time you are running errands.
It changes how you see the grocery store.
It really does. The next time you are standing in the fluorescent aisle of your local grocery store and you reach into the cooler for a plastic gallon of cold milk, or you heave a heavy bag of russet potatoes into your shopping cart, I want you to picture those unseen economic rings.
Big dartboard.
Picture them rippling out from the concrete center of your city, dictating exactly where that specific food had to be planted, how much physical space it was allowed to take up, and exactly how fast it had to travel to reach your hands before it expired.
You are actively participating in the final step of the bid-rent theory every single time you buy groceries.
You really are.
This raises an important question. We have spent this entire deep dive establishing that this global spatial logic, the map of agriculture, is based on the strict necessity of physical distance from the central business district to find cheap land.
All right.
But what happens to that centuries-old map when the rules of physical space fundamentally change?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about the rise of modern technological advancements, like indoor vertical farming.
Growing food inside.
Yes. We are currently developing the ability to stack crops vertically inside massive climate-controlled skyscrapers using highly advanced, ultra-intensive methods that require zero natural sunlight and a fraction of the water.
Wow.
If vertical farming suddenly allows us to place massive, intensive agricultural yields directly back into the very center of the CBD, completely bypassing the need for cheap rural land entirely, How will that redraw the economic rings of our world?
That would change everything.
It challenges the very foundation of the spatial logic humanity has relied on since the agricultural revolution.
That is a wild thought to leave off on. If the farm is suddenly moved inside a downtown skyscraper, the entire dartboard gets flipped upside down.
The math completely changes.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden economic logic of our food. Keep looking out those airplane windows, keep asking why things are exactly where they are, and we will catch you on the next one.